Chapter 12. Those About to Die. It was dark. It was also very disorientating. One moment Reyes was standing on top of a building overlooking a busy market, the sun was bright, and, other than a little bit of snow, the day was clear. Suddenly everything was so dark that had he extended an arm before him, he wouldn't have been able to see his hand. He could sense the presence of both Quinnigoff and Tanegi with him, and he could even see a vague shadow standing next to him of one or other of the huntresses, but he couldn't begin to guess which one she was. He could also hear scuffling coming from other parts of what Reyes assumed to be a fairly large room. Then slowly, conversations that might have halted the moment Reyes and his two bodyguards arrived, suddenly began again. Most of what was spoken was in Elistrian Elvish, but somewhere behind him an almost whispered conversation was being exchanged in Harpy. Slowly, his head still throbbing with the pains of having recently spoken to Mangloss, Reyes tried to get his bearings. There was some kind of light source somewhere over to his left. It wasn't a powerful light source and thus didn't do a lot to illuminate the place, but it did serve as a focal point for what Reyes began to realise was the front of a very large cell. What happened, Hush, Reyes said quickly. Wherever we aren't alone. Where are we? That had to be Tanegi. How did we get here? Quinnigoff wondered worriedly. At a guess, in a cell at the arena, Reyes replied. Somewhere behind him someone laughed. The arena, boss? Tanegi asked. Reyes rounded on the huntress. You killed someone in broad daylight, under the very nose of an eye in the sky. Where do you think we are? Yes, we're in the city's arena. In the arena, Quinnigoff replied. She glanced round towards him, but seemed to be looking past him. I told you to wait before you did anything. I knew the eyes were up there. We were at the market for... He hesitated before he accidentally invoked some human deity instead of the harpy one. Why wouldn't you wait? My chief, Quinnigoff said defensively. How could I know? Although he had stopped her from using the word chief once, she insisted on banding it around as if she had no care for the possible consequences of everyone in the cell knowing who he was. How could you know? Reyes said angrily. Don't they have eyes in Cassitella? They always hang around places like the markets. It's where they expect most trouble. Aye. Quinnigoff sounded a little uncertain. They do, my chief, she admitted. Reyes sighed. He closed his eyes for a second, and then returned his attention to his immediate surroundings, and perhaps finding a way to escape. The light source that Reyes had assumed was coming from the front of the cell was being provided by a pair of oil lanterns hanging from wall sconces, and doing little other than lighting up a small part of the wall behind them, and the bars of the cell that Reyes and many others seemed to be sharing. It was hard to see much of anything else. Even the area between where the two lanterns were hanging seemed to fade slowly into almost totally black darkness. I can't see a thing. That sounded like Quinnigoff's voice. The absence of the words "my chief" suggested that she had just spoken out loud to whomever was in earshot. Well, Reyes felt he could fix that. There wasn't a lot of light coming up of those two lanterns, but there was probably enough for the cat sight spell. His head throbbed with the pain at the mere thought of trying to do a little bit of magic. He wasn't sure that he had a lot of other options, though. At the moment, he felt most helpless. Even if he cast a spell, it was only going to illuminate the problem. Reyes concentrated on the spell. He muttered the magic words under his breath, feeling relatively confident that no one else in the cell would even notice him as he made the required hand gestures. It was simply too dark in here. Elves and goblins, and who knew what other creatures he was sharing a cell with, might have better eyesight than he did normally. But surely even they would have trouble seeing much in this dark place. The spell cast, he could now see Quinnigoff and Tanegi when he turned round to look at them. They both wore very worried expressions, having suddenly been cast into what seemed like a dark underground dungeon. Quinnigoff, for one, had turned her back on Reyes and had extended her claws, as if ready for any kind of trouble. By comparison, Tanegi seemed less than ready for combat, though quite a bit more scared. Reyes was reminded for a moment of Gagara. He was so glad she wasn't here. She had almost lost control back when she was stuck in that slaver's cage, and that had been out in the open sunlight. An underground cell, such as this one, would most likely have driven her mad with fear. Now that he could see his surroundings, he had a better look at the cell and its occupants. It was a large cell. It was probably a good 100 feet from side to side and from front to back. The entire front facade of the cell consisted of very old, rusty-looking bars. The bars seemed to glow with a gentle magical light. The other 3 walls of the cell were made of brick. By the look of them, they were huge and grey. But in this light, even with his eyes enhanced by cat's sight, everything looked grey. Each of the 3 stone walls of the cell housed a thin wooden bench. It was on these benches that the majority of the other inmates of the cell were sitting. Most of them were elves. Reyes counted at least 20 elves, sitting in small groups around the cell. He counted no less than 11 goblins, 4 other harpies, and sitting on his own in one of the corners of the cell was a glum-looking minotaur. Then, suddenly, Tanegi spoke up. "My dart thrower seems to have vanished." "Mine too," added Gwynagolf. Reyes acknowledged the comments, but he was more interested in the 4 other harpies. Ever since Reyes and his 2 bodyguards had arrived in the cell, the 4 had evidently been scrutinising and chatting about the newcomers. Chances were that they had been in the cell for quite some time, allowing their eyes to acclimatise, if only a little, to the darkness. They still wouldn't be able to see as clearly as Reyes did now, but they had likely been able to make out the outline of Reyes, Gwynagolf and Tanegi when they had first appeared in the cell. It soon became clear that they had been listening to every word, as one of these harpies suddenly decided to join in conversation with the comment, "Don't lay an egg, dear. They always confiscate any weapons you might be carrying. They don't want to risk the chance that we might start killing each other down here instead of out on the arena floor. I think they would even confiscate our claws if they could." "I'm glad they haven't," Reyes commented. He unsheathed and resheathed his claws, checking that they were indeed still there. What was surprising to Reyes wasn't that they had taken the weapons of his bodyguards, so much as they had left him with his ring. Surely one of the arena officials would have seen the magical glow coming up of it and confiscated it. But no, it was still on his finger. He couldn't help but wonder if the contents of the ring were still intact, or if everything else had been confiscated. There, in the dark of the cell, he daren't risk checking its contents. Happy to see that his ring and his claws seemed to have been left untouched, Reyes decided to consider his wings. Reyes had seen the arena floor. He had seen the way it was open to the sky, easy for a harpy to fly to freedom, unless they had done something to his wings. The ceiling of this cell was too low, so he knew he wouldn't be able to actually take off and test his wings properly. But he felt he could unfurl them, and maybe give them 1 or 2 test flaps. "My wings seem to be intact," Reyes commented. There was something about this girl that made him feel he could trust her, and yet he couldn't put his finger on what it was. "How are they going to stop us from just flying away?" "Have you never watched harpies fight in the arena?" the girl asked. "They'll place special manacles over our wings. I'm not sure exactly how they work, only that you won't even be able to move your wings, let alone fly." The harpy sitting next to the girl who had just spoken added, "I've heard they're very uncomfortable to wear, but it's better than having your wings removed." Another of the 4 stated, "They're still crippling our abilities. I'm not sure I know how to fight unless I'm flying." Reyes had a vague collection of the manacles that had been mentioned. The girl had always been trying to get him to accompany her to the arena. He remembered how keen she'd been on one fighter in particular, an ogre called Skeeg or something like that. It was a long time ago now, and after the ogre had won his 20th bout, not a word had been heard about him since. Anyway, he remembered watching a harpy fighting for her very life. He remembered he had found the whole thing sickening, but he did remember those chains. There were 5 loops, one of which went around the tail to anchor the others in place. The remaining 4 loops were placed around both the top and the bottom of the 2 wings. The chain was pulled so tight that it would have been impossible to even attempt to move either of her wings. "Yes," Reyes commented, "I think I remember seeing them. I'm really not looking forward to having to wear them," she replied. "I'm sure they must cause cramp in the wings." "Something else to lower your combat ability," one of the others commented. "I take it then that you haven't actually fought in the arena yet?" Reyes asked. "None of us have," the girl replied. "We're all fairly new to this game. This is the untested cell. Every week they dump the contents of this cell into the arena together and make us fight it out. Thus they can see who among us might provide some entertainment for the masses in the future, and who it would be a waste of time for them to keep alive." "I admit, I feel sorry for you," the first girl commented. "Oh?" Reyes asked. "Why is that?" "Well, admittedly I can't actually see you to be certain, but since one of your friends referred to you as Chief, I'm assuming that you're probably male." "That's definitely a male's voice," said another. Reyes said doubtfully. He checked again that the ring was still on his finger. He didn't think he had changed back to his natural appearance, but just in case he brought himself into the female body. Even if the elves had emptied the ring, that part of it should still work. Then he rounded on Quinagoff. I keep telling her not to call me Chief. I've never heard of a male that could fight, the girl added. I can fight, Reyes commented. The harpy laughed. I'm not talking about the gentle bout, the mock battles that your sisters let you win back when you were heir to your village. I'm talking about real fighting, when another living being is trying to take your life. Reyes decided not to push the issue any further. Once they stepped out into the light of the arena, they would be able to see for themselves that he was really female, and might accordingly show some respect for his martial skills. Don't you worry about me, Reyes told them. But it'll be even more dangerous out there for you than for any of us, the harpy commented. There will be girls watching you fight from their perches up in the galleries. Even if you should happen to win all your bouts, sooner or later some huntress is likely to take it into her head that you represent a threat to her male, and will decide to do something about it. Some huntresses would willingly take the risk, because if she succeeded and got away with it, she would earn the praise of her entire village. They might even make her their leader. What about you? Quinagoff asked. Are you a threat to my male? Hush, Reyes growled. The harpy laughed. Don't lay an egg, sweetie. No, I'm not a threat to your male. Nor would I have been before they grabbed me off the street. I'm one of the disenfranchised. I have no village of my own. But you did belong to a village once, Quinagoff pressed. Once, you replied. Long, long ago. But to them I no longer exist. Now I'm all alone in the world. It's the same for all of us, one of the others voiced. Libna here might not have been a member of a village, but the rest of us were. We will be here for so long that by the time we get out, our villages will more than likely have forgotten who we are. They won't want us back. Even assuming we win all our bouts and don't die of old age in the cells, another offered. It happens a lot with harpies, the one called Libna admitted. We could be stuck here at the arena for years. Years? Reyes commented unhappily. I can't afford to stay here that long. I have things I need to be doing. We all had lives before the arena, Libna replied. Your girls will just have to get along without you. By the time you're free, your heir, if you have one, will have replaced you as chief, and you'll have to fight to get your own village back. Assuming I was male, Reyes clarified. Assuming you're male, Libna agreed, a slight laugh in her voice. After all, huntresses often refer to other huntresses as their chief. Right, Reyes commented. He gazed accusingly at Quinagoff. Evidently not seeing the look Reyes gave her, Quinagoff chose that moment to say, I said we shouldn't have brought you along, my chief. I have to agree, boss, Tanegi offered. Libna started to laugh. See what I mean? Reyes sighed. He shook his head and said, They haven't had a prisoner like me before. It might be an idea if I gave the door and the bars a closer look. Good luck, Libna said, and then she giggled and added, I don't doubt that we'll be seeing you later. As Reyes turned and headed across the cell to the bars, he could hear the other 4 harpies in the cell discussing something between them. He tried to ignore their words, but in a way he found them mildly amusing. Did harpies never think of anything else? Do you really think we should let her go like that? After all, she is male. What's your point? Well, we may never get another opportunity to be with a male again. Expecting to die, are you? Actually, I was thinking more along the lines that she might die. Well, go ahead if you wish. Beware of those 2 bodyguards she has, though. I'm not sure they'll take kindly to someone infringing upon their rights. Maybe I'll leave it for now. She might come to me later. This was followed shortly by laughter and the comment, You seem very sure of yourself. Even when he was standing by the bars of the cell, Reyes could hear them chatting. Fortunately, the subject moved away from him and onto the subject of pretty stones, allowing Reyes to concentrate fully on the job at hand. Each bar glowed with a soft blue light. Being magical in nature, Reyes doubted that anything he tried to do to the bars was likely to work. He even felt uncertain as to whether or not it would be safe to try and touch one of the bars. Tentatively, he reached out with his left hand and touched one of the bars with his fingertips. Nothing happened. The bar was safe to touch. He took hold of the bar firmly with his hand. Still, there was no sign of any ill effect. Reyes decided that the bars probably did something to nullify magic cast on them, assuming they didn't just strike him down for trying. This cage had been built with a mind to the fact that mages might be held here as well as warriors. Nevertheless, perhaps if he could find the door, it would be worth him trying to unlock it. Suddenly there was a loud cry from somewhere behind him. For a moment he was distracted from the bars as he turned to see what had happened. A new arrival had appeared in the cell. It was an elf in his normal everyday clothes, one hand raised as if he was about to bring down some sort of weapon on a foe, but no weapon was evident. He seemed a little confused as he looked around the cell, his hand drifting slowly down to his side on autopilot. "Oh no," he exclaimed. Reyes blinked his eyes twice, and the pain in his head was finally beginning to subside a little. Then he turned his attention back to the bars and followed them along to the main door. It was a typical door for this kind of cell. Mainly it consisted of bars, but at about its midpoint there was a flat plate where a knock would normally be housed. On this door, though, there seemed to be no such lock. Uncertain he was willing to believe what he was seeing, Reyes gripped a couple of the door's bars firmly in his hands, and then, with what felt like very little effort, he pushed the cell door open. "Surely not," Tanegi said. Reyes was a little shocked to realise that both his bodyguards had been following his every movement. "This is too easy," Quinnigoff commented, echoing Reyes' thoughts. "Quiet," Reyes replied. Although the door was open, there was something strange about the air that filled the gap where the door had been. There was a blue glow that made Reyes more than a little suspicious. "How did you get the door open?" one of the elven inmates voiced. "That bit was easy," Reyes replied, "but I wouldn't risk going through the door just yet." "Don't be silly," the elf commented. He pushed through to the bars and stepped past Reyes, walking straight into the blue glow. Suddenly the elf was flown bodily back into the cell. The elf seemed to be flying rather ungracefully backwards through the air. Elsewhere, people in the cell scattered to make room for this sudden impromptu projectile. Then there was a loud thud, and an audible oof as the elf hit the far wall. "Very nasty," Reyes said. He wished he knew enough about magic to begin to guess a way to counter the spell. "I guess they'll take it down when they come to fetch us." "You can't counter it?" Quinnigoff asked. She sounded more than a little surprised. "I thought you were as powerful as Nammerwalt." Reyes looked at Quinnigoff and then at Tanegi, and then he reached out and pulled the cell door closed again. "There's nothing I can do. Sooner or later they're going to have to feed us. Maybe we can find a way out of here then." "What about the walls?" Quinnigoff suggested. Reyes glanced round at the walls. There were too many people. Reyes didn't like the idea of asking the other inmates to step aside so he could test the wall. Besides, he couldn't think of any spells that would be effective against stone. Plus, he was pretty certain that they were underground, and the only thing he would find behind those huge bricks of stone would be packed earth. If we had time, we might be able to tunnel our way out, but I doubt we'll be here that long. Reyes settled down on the ground next to the cell door. The floor was a soft, powdered, mud-like substance. Not very comfortable, but he was sure it was better than the sand of the arena was likely to be. He closed his eyes in an attempt to shut out the world. Ever since he had arrived in that cell, he had felt the pain in his head slowly fade. Maybe in an hour or so he would feel strong enough to try and contact Mangloss again. He had no idea what the mage could do, but at least he could warn his old friend and mentor that he and the canvas were going to be delayed.